I don't think I'm on, now I'm on. And of course, we're having some technical teething problems. Just bear with us while we try to resolve this. Hello, testing 1, 2, 3. Trying not to frighten the audience. How are we going? Sound engineers, are we good? Do we need to test the other microphones? Do you want to test the other ones? Okay. So we're going to, everybody just turn your microphones on and let's make sure there's no, yep, hit the button.
Hello. Yeah.
There's no interference. You just hit, sorry, there's a button there with the red light just underneath. There you go, Di.
Should it be green or red? Ah, that's on now, yeah.
Okay, so when it's your turn to speak, this is very rudimentary, you know, how to use a microphone, but yeah, keep it off until we speak. Sorry, I thought we were going to be connected automatically. We'll start again. Thank you very much for joining us. This does feel somewhat like a revival meeting for journalism, the International Journalism Festival. And unfortunately, it often involves delving into really difficult and challenging territory because over the past decade, so many additional threats to press freedom and the safety of journalists have emerged. And we, the people on this panel, are on the front line of trying to combat one of the most pernicious scourges that journalism is confronting in this era, and that is online violence targeting women journalists. So I'm Julie Posetti, I'm Global Director of Research at the International Centre for Journalists, and I'm joined by two extraordinary women who I'll introduce first, and then the other extraordinary women I'll introduce. To my far left is Rana Ayyub, who is, I'm sure many of you are aware, an internationally known India-based journalist, investigative reporter, who's a columnist with the Washington Post and is targeted by the Indian state in direct retaliation for her critical independent reporting. And to my right, immediately to my right, is Trish Devlin, another celebrated investigative journalist who is from Northern Ireland, who is one of the most frightening cases, if I can dehumanise you just for a moment, Trish, in terms of research, having looked at hundreds of women's experiences now. Trish, unfortunately, and we'll come to this, has experienced some really terrifying digital violence threats in the UK. So this is to demonstrate partly that this is a threat that spreads across the spectrum geographically. To Trisha's right is my colleague Nabila Shabir from ICFJ, who works with us on the project that we're introducing you to today. And to my left is Dr. Diana Maynard, who is an extraordinary mountain climbing, legally blind computer scientist, which is how I like to introduce her, a very fierce woman from the University of Sheffield, and a key collaborator on our emerging responses to this threat. So this session is called Towards an Online Violence Early Warning System. And we will unpack that for you and introduce you to some of the tools we're developing, as well as hear from these remarkable women who are on the front line in the sense of being the targets, unfortunately, of gender-based online violence targeting women journalists. So we have been commissioned by initially the UK government and very recently, within recent days, we've added Luminate as a philanthropic funder to this work, supporting us to produce what we hope will be a comprehensive system that moves from an approach that involves counting incidents of physical violence and ultimately even death with impunity towards an approach that uses the tools available to us to see where the indications of an escalation of online violence to offline harm exist, and to try to figure out ways to intervene to mitigate the trajectory of online violence into physical harm. So we got to this point on the back of a huge body of research, which was originally commissioned by UNESCO back in 2019, And it was a major study of 15 countries, looking at online violence as it manifested in 15 countries. And we surveyed over 700 women journalists around the world, as well as conducted deep dive interviews with over 180 women journalists and experts in this field, including those working within civil society organisations trying to respond to this crisis. So this was a 3-year study. The final book-length study was published at the end of last year. All of these resources are freely available online. One of the key recommendations from this study, which also featured to what UNESCO described as pioneering big data case studies, where we examined 2.5 million social media posts directed at Maria Ressa and Carol Cadwallader. Maria is, of course, now a Nobel laureate, having won the Nobel Peace Prize at the end of 2021, in part for her incredibly brave responses to the digital violence that she experiences, and Carol Cadwallader, an investigative reporter for The Guardian and Observer based in the UK. So one of the key recommendations that flowed from this study was in reference to this particular finding, which is that 20% of the women journalists we surveyed had experienced offline harm, which ranged from being abused in shopping centres while doing the grocery shopping in multiple countries, in reference to the sorts of language that was being used in social media campaigns against them, through to being punched in the face and lawfare, as it's often described, targeted campaigns that seeded narratives of journalists as criminal in both Maria Ressa's case and Rana Ayyub's case, to name 2 examples. And then we have the example of Trish Devlin sitting here, whose experience was seeing the online violence spill offline to physical graffiti on a brick wall in Belfast, which included the sights of a gun being trained towards her and her name. So this is the sort of horrific experience that we've documented in this research, demonstrating that online violence is real harm and leads to potentially physical violence as well. So this data point led to a recommendation in the study from the first recommendations that were published from the chilling, as it was called, the study, that were published in May 2021. The recommendation was, after a couple of years of swimming in this horrific data, the researchers on the project, including Diana and Nabila, we concluded that we were seeing evidence of trajectories from online to offline harm, and that this was an evidence base that we should be reacting to, not just documenting, and starting to respond to, hopefully in more real-time ways, so that we could, not just monitor, but then potentially predict and prevent the escalation to offline harm. So this figure of 20% of the women experiencing online violence, then going on to experience what they deemed to be connected physical violence, led to that recommendation. And in response, the UK government came to us, the Foreign Office, and said that they wanted to invest in trying to enact what we recommended, which was the development of an early warning system, which we hoped could include key responders right through to UN special rapporteurs, so that there could be a rapid response process associated with this. So our methodology for developing this system at a very rapid pace, much more like being back in a newsroom than being a researcher, I have to say, and I'm sure Di will testify to that. In a 6-month period, we produced 5 additional big data case studies, and then we analysed all of the data that we'd gathered between those 7 case studies initially, and we've added 2 others since. Rana Ayyub was one of the big data case studies we produced. Another was focused on Rana Ayyub, who is a celebrated Arabic language reporter and presenter for Al Jazeera, who's actually been forced off air as a result of the horrendous state-linked online violence she's experienced, having been targeted by the Saudi state. So our method was to gather these massive data sets. In the end, we were looking at, I think it was something approximating 18 million social media posts across all of these case studies, to try to ascertain what the trends were, where were the inflection points, to do a combination of what's called natural language processing, which Di will talk more about, so computational analysis of the big data sets, combining that with what really is most approximating investigative reporting, contextual analysis of what was happening to build a timeline in these cases. And from that research, we were able then to deploy the system that we've started to develop, an automated system for monitoring and analysis in investigative journalism projects, including a collaboration with Panorama just late last year. The BBC's Panorama is the preeminent television current affairs program in the UK. That is a picture of Mariana Spring, who is the dedicated disinformation reporter and social media reporter with the BBC. Mariana is one of the big data case studies we're producing in the context of this research. And we assisted Mariana with the work of analysing the abuse that she's been experiencing since 2021 through to the current day for a program she was producing about the impacts of Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter and the calamity that has unfolded following that in terms of online violence, particularly as experienced by women, but other minoritized and marginalized groups. And so we were able to demonstrate that by comparing the period in the 3 months after or 2 months after Elon Musk took over Twitter to the same period the previous year, we could identify a tripling in obviously abusive content directed at Mariana Spring. That program is available still in the UK. You have to figure out ways to use the internet to watch it elsewhere at the moment, I think. So from this research, we have now partnered with the OSCE to dig deeper into what we identified as 14 key indicators for online violence escalation, designed for aiding the monitoring of these events as they occur within newsrooms, within civil society organisations, within intergovernmental organisations, and within, say, state-based, national committees on the safety of journalists, for example. So we've identified these indicators, and we don't have time to go through all of them today, but they will be published next month, and alongside monitoring guidance, so that apart from identifying what the key indicators are for these escalation points, we've created some guidelines for how to monitor this and how to respond to the threats when they arise. So they'll be published, as I say, next month. So we're just going to run through a few. Some of them will be really obvious. Others have been, we've found them in reference to specific case studies, and since identifying them, we've started to see them occurring in various other contexts. So the first one is an obvious one: identifiable or suspected state or foreign state actor involvement. Now, I referenced, certainly in Rana's case, we have indications of state-enabled and state-amplified online violence. In the case of Rana Ayyub, we see foreign state actors being extremely pertinent. So in Rana's case, it's not Qatar where she is based, it's not Lebanon where she is from, it's the Saudi state, and connections have also been made to the UAE and other state actors in the Middle East. So we see this too in cases involving BBC Persian journalists working in the UK, but who are originally from Iran, being targeted very directly and seriously by people who have been identified as Iranian state actors. So this is a really disturbing trend, and obviously leads to increased concern about the targeting of the journalists, whether or not they're in close proximity, because one of the things we know is that in coordinated and targeted online violence, and particularly disinformation-oriented online violence campaigns, we see agents of the state, whether they are for hire or in some way connected politically, offshore, so in the countries where the journalists are operating, also participating in these campaigns. Threats associated with impunity cases. This is one of the ones that we identified that had not been previously identified, which is really shocking. So women journalists being threatened with reference to the murder of journalistic colleagues. So we see in Rana's case, her being threatened in connection with Gauri Lankesh, an Indian journalist who was murdered with impunity, although there are some moves now towards a degree of accountability for her murder at the end of 2017. We see the journalist Caroline Muscat also being targeted with reference to the assassination of Daphne Caruana Galizia in Malta, for example. So they're threatened. You will be next, essentially, and threatened often with, and I think Trish, you also experienced a threat like this with reference to one of your colleagues at Sunday World having been murdered, I think 20 years ago. So yeah, so this is a really frightening trend and one that we need to be extremely alert to. It's obviously a death threat, but it's a death threat, that's referencing impunity cases in a really shocking way. Another one, which of course, courtesy of investigations into Pegasus spyware, has reawakened us to the link between targeted surveillance and interception and online violence campaigns. So we have the example in Rana Ayyub's case study, and both of those case studies are also freely available online, I should add. Rana's and Rana's, the others we're still publishing. But in Rana's case, she has been identified as one of the targets of Pegasus spyware being used to access photos that were then manipulated as part of a disinformation campaign used to target her. We also see targeted attacks against family members, and I'm going to throw to Nabila now to share some insights into the next few indicators.
So when the online violence radiates to family members, that can be children, but of course in more conservative cultures we noted that stories of parents being targeted in more sort of honor-based societies really should be an indication. It sounds really obvious to say it, but it's like the risk is spreading, the pressure is increasing, and the alert should be heightened. So one of the most awful examples we actually have is of Trish, who's sitting next to me, I hope you don't mind me sharing, but whose infant child was threatened with a rape threat on Facebook Messenger. So there's just no recourse to getting that profile taken down. It's sent to you privately. And it's not just family members, it's bystanders, it's also sources who are targeted in parallel. And 13% of our survey respondents from our survey 2 years ago said that when they were attacked and someone spoke up for them, that they had also received threats of violence against those close to them.
And the psychological harm is another major impact that's associated with long-range attacks.
And so, psychological injury, again, I think is something which is a little bit more dismissed when it comes to experiencing online violence. And so we actually found that that was the most frequently identified impact of online violence by women journalists internationally. And so, it impacts your economic security, it impacts your relationships, it impacts your ability to work. Again, I think there are people on this panel who can talk to that. And I think just the most important thing as putting that as an indicator is making really clear that it's not a lesser harm. It has devastating consequences, and it's something which really needs to be recognized and brought to the fore.
And finally, we have 14 of these. This is the last one we have time to reference, which is intersectional abuse.
Thank you for teeing me up for each of these. I'm being really brief because we don't have so much time, but intersectional abuse obviously occurs at the nexus of different forms of discrimination. So misogyny coupled with racism, coupled with homophobia, religious bigotry, sectarianism, anti-Semitism, you name it. Some women get it, some women journalists get it from just every angle. And so it's a widespread problem, and we've been identifying emblematic cases of online violence, of women journalists who are experiencing online violence, and honestly, in every case, they have been at that intersection, and therefore, again, the alert should be heightened. So Rana Ayyub in Lebanon is a Christian woman working in predominantly Muslim societies, attacked for her age. She's a little bit older. She doesn't have children, And Rana, of course, on this panel, a Muslim woman being targeted in a country by trolls who identify as Hindu nationalists. We also have Carmen Aristegui, who's a journalist in Mexico, who's just attacked for being a lesbian because she wears a suit and has short hair. And it's just this kind of intersectional abuse that we want to highlight and really put as one of the key indicators in this.
And Trish also is an example of somebody working in a sort of sectarian context who's targeted in Northern Ireland. So there's unfortunately so many different points of intersection with the women who are with us today. So I'm going to hand to Di now, and we're just going to do a tech tap dance while we switch laptops. So as part of this project, we have now a prototype tool, which we're calling the Twitter Abuse Dashboard currently, while we continue to experiment with this, which is allowing us in real time now to analyse threats and abuse towards women journalists. So over to you, Di.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a very, very brief tour of the dashboard and the tools we've been developing. I could talk for hours about this, but I'll just give you some highlights of what we've been doing. So essentially, I'm going to take the case of Rana as an example here. So I'm going to show you the dashboard of Rana. So we've been collecting and analysing tweets about, as I say, various case studies. So for Rana, I'll just go to this tab. Basically, we collect tweets in real time. We analyse them with automated natural language processing tools, which try and detect abuse, not just whether the tweet's abusive, but whether it's abusive specifically towards the person in question, in this case, Rana. And we characterise it in terms of what kind of abuse is it, so whether it's racist, whether it's misogynistic, whether it's attacking her reputation, and so on. We calculate all kinds of statistics, and then we analyse all kinds of information about who's sending it, the time it takes, the most frequent kinds of hashtags, the most frequent keywords, and so on and so forth, connections between the people sending abuse. So, for example, if lots of people send abusive replies to the same tweet, there may be some connection. We look at the time taken and so on. So I'll just show you some highlights of the dashboard. And these can be updated in real time as the tweets are coming in. They just automatically update. We've also been working in multiple languages. So here we were looking at the abuse itself. So we can see some statistics about the abuse. We could see hashtags. We can see the spikes over time. So we see the yellow ones, which are the original tweets, and the blue, which is the retweets. So in the dashboard, we also see a separation between, we separate out just the original tweets, but also the retweets so that we can see how they proliferate, how they get retweeted. We can see things like the topics used. We can see the top abusive phrases used. These are categorized by color to see the types of abuse. So we see things like idiot, bitch. I won't read them all out. And again, we see the word cloud of the abusive phrases and so on. This is all interactive, this dashboard, so we can click on things and then just narrow the dashboard down to looking at that specific thing. So looking at particular hashtags, looking at particular time periods, looking at particular abuse types and so on.
I should just add that, I mean, Rana is sitting here, we're looking at data about her, and we're seeing some pretty, revolting abuse on the screen here. Unfortunately, it's nothing new to Rana. Nevertheless, it's obviously potentially, re-traumatizing, but this is to say that it needs to be confronted. We need to be able to share it with you and in ways that allow you to even just, for a moment, consider what it might be like to be flooded with this crap every second. And in Rana's case, we know every 3 seconds, for example, she will, if she's exposed to online violence, according to our initial data analysis, within 3 seconds she's getting abusive responses. And within 14 seconds, right, Di, we're starting to see spikes. So yes, I just wanted to contextualise.
Yeah, in fact, I can go specifically to that. So if we look specifically at the triggers, and again here we can see a graph of just within the first hour of a tweet being sent by Rana. This is how many minutes it takes. Within the first hour, we see that within 2 minutes, that's 3 minutes. That's the biggest spike. So most of the abuse in the first hour is sent within 3 minutes, and we see if we look within that time. We can see tweets coming in within the first 2-3 seconds. We see abuse coming in.
And the way that would link to a response plan, which we'll discuss, is obviously when you see a spike in the data, this is an indication, a spike in obvious abuse, which is what our tools are detecting. This ultimately, you hope to be able to send an alert in reference to that.
So we can look also, we can see things like who are the top people who are sending the most abuse. I should also clarify that the abuse we're finding, we don't find all the abuse, we miss a lot of it. Tools are not perfect. And this is why we use this kind of mixed methods approach where we have the big data, the tools, to try and analyze as best we can what we can do with automated tools. We know we miss a lot of it. We sometimes get it wrong because it's impossible. For example, trying to analyze images and videos and so on, subtle abuse is really hard. But this shows the trends and so on. And then here we've got the tweets that Rana sent that generated the most abuse in response. And again, we can sort them in different ways. But if I'll just show you it in another tab because it takes a while to load. So this is one of the tweet that garnered the most abuse. And we can start to explore the data. So we can see what happened after she sent this tweet. And we can sort, these are all the tweets in response. We can filter them by different types. So here I'm just looking at the abusive tweets in reply, and we can see all the different types. So we can start to see what happens. And then we can click on one of these and see what happened after that. And we can go and look at who was sending it. Here we can see some of these accounts have been suspended. I mean, this is happening in real time, so we collected it when they weren't suspended, but now they've been suspended since. And again, we can start to see, we can see a lot of them haven't been suspended. So we can start to see different types. We see tweets in Hindi as well as in English. We see a lot of Hinglish as well, and so on. So yes, there's, as I say, we have all kinds of other tools for exploring relationships between the senders of the abuse and so on. I'll stop there because otherwise I could go on for hours, but you get a flavour of the kind of things that we're able to do. And as I said, this enables the experts to then go in and explore further once they're given a kind of starting point with this, where we start to see the trends. And these can also help us with things like understanding the subtle gaslighting. We can really see the spread of this. When you look at individual tweets, you don't see it. When you look at this in a big data set and you see the graphs and you see just the volume and how it spreads over time, this is when we start to get a proper idea of what's really going on under the surface. So this is really critical for the indicators.
Yeah, and we're aware that Twitter is deeply problematic. That is the site which has currently allowed access in a way that enables us to collect and then analyse without fear of legal threat prior to the time that that individual states seeking to hold the platforms to account might create opportunities for us to gather other data. But we are not stuck with Twitter. We intend to explore other data avenues as well. Wherever journalists are, ultimately we need some system like this so that we can actually more effectively monitor and respond to gender-based online violence against women journalists. Twitter collapses, the trolls, the haters, the networked disinformation agents will find them wherever they go. This is not disappearing anytime soon, very sadly. So just to wrap up this part of the discussion before we hear from Trish and Rana directly, this project has now attracted significant additional funding from the UK Foreign Office, FCDO as it's abbreviated, for the next 2.5 years. So we'll actually be going with this work until towards the end of 2025. And just in the past few days, as I mentioned at the beginning, Luminate, the philanthropic organisation, has thankfully topped up our funding in ways which will allow us to diversify not just the case study approach, but importantly, the newsroom partners that we'll be developing in Global South contexts, which of course is really vital because this is something that happens globally, and that's a really important aspect of this ongoing work. The other part of the project involves inserting the humans into the loop. And to reiterate, we are doing this out of an act of desperation and exasperation because the platforms have dismally failed to take this problem, this threat seriously, and to provide appropriate opportunities to monitor and escalate within their systems the targeted online violence that women journalists experience. Ultimately, we would expect and hope that the platforms would come on board with something like this and actually facilitate it themselves and to work with us. We are not in that situation currently, sadly. And the door remains open for serious collaboration at this point. You know, we have drawn, a line under an approach which says we are not interested in collaborating until you're serious about actually addressing this problem. But what we are serious about is bringing experts into the space, key responders. So we have a panel of experts on a special advisory panel which met for the first time yesterday, including people I see Rebecca Vincent from RSF, Keelan Gallagher, who's about to be on another panel, a QC. We have Asha Allen, who's an expert in technologically facilitated online violence, but who also specialises in regulatory and legislative responses, Annette Young from France 24, a gender editor. So we have a range of experts, and that panel will expand as we try to develop a rapid response mechanism as part of this project. Kristen Sker-Augeray, who's also in the audience, I'll point out as well, from Oslo Met University, bringing academic expertise on safety of journalists. So I'm going to stop there so that we have at least 20 minutes to hear from Trish and Rana. And Rana, I'll start with you. You know, I realise we have been with you in the trenches for some time, not nearly as exposed as you are, but exposed to the level that every time we have advocated for you in a social media space, we have experienced the kind of the radiating troll effect, if you like, of your trolls coming for us as well, which happens with many of the other cases, including Maria Ressa's. So we know that what you have discussed over the years is real on the basis of this evidence. But just for the sake of people here who may find it, quite insensitive to be sitting here talking about you and with all this data in front of you, I know it's horrific stuff. But can you tell us, perhaps, from your perspective, why gathering this data and being able to demonstrate it has been valuable?
Good morning, everybody. I mean, you just got a slice of our life. I mean, from these wonderful moments. This is a slice of our daily life, and it's good to have somebody else talk about it as opposed to you, because journalists are not supposed to talk about themselves. So I'm glad others are talking about it and doing these data studies. It is important because, a lot of times we hear about journalists being harassed online. People believe, you go to officials, you go to cops, and they're like, yeah, but you got it online. They didn't come to your doorstep, right? That's normally the refrain, the common refrain. Julie spoke about Gauri Lankesh, who was my colleague. I published a book, a tell-all book in 2016. It's called Gujarat Files, and Gauri reached out to me saying she wanted to translate the book in a regional language. And we were in the process of doing this, and one day, probably through the release of the book, there was an increased online harassment that I was undercover, and because I used to titillate men, that's what the Twitter trend is. Of course, when it comes to women, it's also sexist in more ways, because how dare you? As women, she must have, it must have been easier for her to just go undercover and get people to speak because she's a young woman, right? And people speak up when they see young women, apparently because we have no skill sets of our own. So Gauri reached out to me and said, babe, these are all paper tigers, nincompoops, don't respond to them. And then on my Facebook, she wrote, so proud of you, but again, these are online, right? And we have a book event planned, and the next day, Gauri is shot dead outside her house in Bangalore, a cosmopolitan city. And till today, we have not done the book launch of the Kannada edition of the book because, I spoke to her sister, and I'm like, I cannot bring myself to do that. Okay? And Gauri always said that, it's online harassment. I'm not scared of these. I'm not scared. These are people who are just writing on the internet. This is no longer writing on the internet. When Julie published this data study, and when ICFJ did this, I saw people, especially in the media in India, kind of taking this up, because a lot of times these fall within the cracks, saying, it's not as important. But the fact that I'm attacked every 19 seconds says something, to the extent that once I just put a full stop, just one dot on my Twitter to see if this is regarding my opinion, my journalism, or is just what is it that offends them. To one full stop, there were like 1,000 replies. Jihadi Jain, sexist bitch, Islamic sex slave. That's the kind of abuse that I get, and which is why Last week, in fact, I was sitting with the Mumbai police because in January this year, there was a guy who gives me relentless death and rape threats, and it's very explicit. He tells me exactly how he's going to gang rape me and my sister and my niece and my mother, right? I went to the Mumbai police, they booked him. It's been 2 months, he deactivated his account. Realizing that the cops are not taking any action, the man reactivates his account 4 days ago and says, so there were 2 Muslim politicians, gangsters who were assassinated in India in front of the cameras. He said, I'm going to assassinate you like that in an extrajudicial murder. So when it is, we are supposed to, it is supposed to be an occupational hazard for us. You know, I mean, you are in it. You are in it. You're supposed to face these online threats. But it's important for these data studies to come to the fore to realize that this is a planned setup. It is not something that is happening in isolation. There are people who are operating, as Di said, that, you know, as soon as I put a tweet, within 5 minutes, there are like hundreds and thousands of abuses. It's coordinated, it's organized, it's not coming in isolation. So which is why it's extremely important to now understand the difference between online and offline harassment. There's a very, very thin line that differentiates online and offline. When somebody sent burnt copies of my book at my residence, right? Which means that they know where I stay, which means it's no longer on the internet. When somebody morphs my image on a porn video and circulates it all over the country, it's on WhatsApp, it's on Twitter, and people find my number and ask me for my rates, which means it's as close as it gets, which means they have my number, which means they have my address. So it's not just, oh, it's just on the internet. You feel it's like a virtual lynch mob which is out to molest you, and it's happening on the internet. You know, the way they, when I spoke in solidarity with the hijabi women in Iran, and then I said I also stand in solidarity with the hijabi women in India who are fighting for the right to wear the hijab, they picked up my picture from Instagram, which is basically on a beach, and said, and every time I tweet, that picture inadvertently comes up saying, this Islamist bitch wants to be seen as a practicing Muslim, but wears swimsuit on her Instagram. That's how much of hypocrite she is. So when this data study came about, I'm glad that finally Indian publications actually made it a news story and said, okay, there is a data study on it, which means it is not an aberration. This is a norm. This is a new norm to silence journalists. It is a pattern. You see with Patricia, you see with Trish, from Brazil, you see Maria Ressa, right? You see Carol. The states, the dictators, the populists learn from each other. They're not practicing in isolation. They all take notes from each other. They know, I mean, last year, for 3 full days when the government slapped money laundering charges against me, besides the fact that there were cameras outside my house, I was trending 3 full days on Twitter was the worst kind of abuse against me and my family. If you Google me right now, all you will see is money laundering, tax evasion, robber, thief. My news, the journalism that I do, is not there on Google. My pieces, my journalism, the investigation is not on Google. What you see on Google is the charges against me. And it is triggering. It is triggering as a journalist who has spent 15 years in the profession that the sum total of what you have done is the charges that you see on the internet and on Google.
And that is creating this enabling environment for legal harassment, which we see certainly in your case, and we definitely see in Maria Ressa's case. And even if we go back to examine the case of the assassinated journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia, posthumously, you can see the ways in which online violence targeting her was used to create an acceptance of the criminalisation of this journalist. I'll come back to you in a moment, Rana, but Trish, if I can put a similar question to you, and we didn't include your specific case in a big data case study, but you were one of the key interviewees for our research, and foregrounding what you've been through was painful in many respects, but I think in some ways empowering. But can you perhaps respond to what it is that we're trying to do here, and think about how it might have assisted you or might assist you in the future if we're able to actually produce something that does allow us to issue alerts and be more preventive?
Absolutely, Julie. Well, morning everybody. I'm from Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. It's very important that you included my case in this, Julie, because a lot of people sitting here would think, the UK is relatively safe to be a journalist, when in fact in Northern Ireland, 2 journalists have been murdered in peace times since the conflict ended, and one of those murders only happened a few years ago. Lyra McKee, who was shot dead by dissident Republicans in Derry. Martin O'Hagan was shot dead. He would have been a former colleague of mine in the Sunday World newspaper, which writes about crime. He was shot dead in 2001, and the thing that links those 2 journalist murders so many years apart is impunity. No one has ever been convicted over their killings. And that impunity stays on. It stays on in the multiple threats that are made to journalists in Northern Ireland. There is no action taken against those that committed, and sometimes the police are actually delivering these threats to the journalists themselves through intelligence sources, basically meaning the police know who are sending the threats, but they're not doing anything about it. They're just delivering it to the journalists. I had to go through that 6 times during the pandemic, with police coming to my door, with police telling me to change my security arrangements, a panic alarm in my home, and this was all down to online abuse. This was down to online abuse because of my reporting. Each time there was a pile-on, there would be a threat. Each time there was a pile-on, my name would get sprayed on a wall somewhere with a gun crosshair. And then also the worst part of it was having my newborn baby threatened with rape. And so a platform like this, a tool like this for journalists, because I'm sure Rana can say this as well, when you're going through those pile-ons on social media, you literally feel like you're drowning, and you don't know whether you want to see the abuse, whether you don't want to see it, and it just all piles up and you feel like there's no escape. And then at times you want to feel that you want to forget it, which for years, after getting misogynistic and sectarian abuse online, I tried to ignore it. But my red line was in 2019 when I received the threat to my personal Facebook page, which said that a neo-Nazi terrorist group was going to rape my newborn son. I said, I can't do this anymore. I've had enough. I have to go to the police. And now that's a different matter. But to have a tool like this, where we can sit back and look and go, right, where's the trends here? Where's this coming from? And go into the authorities. And because that was another thing that I found hard, going to the police to report it. Because again, you felt lost. You were like, well, this account said this, and this account said this, and you're just getting lost. And then the police just, these are anonymous accounts. But if this could help identify trends, could it help identify links? And I'm so glad to hear that you've got further funding, Julie, for it, because it can only get better. And what I see at the moment is, thankfully, more protection for journalists like me and Rana, and also younger female journalists coming into journalism that can feel that can help them. So, brilliant.
Thank you so much. I mean, there are so many challenges yet for this project to take life, not least, dealing with the platforms and riding the unpredictable wave that is the environment at Twitter and Facebook and elsewhere. But what we are trying to do, as we've said, is to create a system that can then be adapted in different technological environments, because gender-based online violence is unfortunately one of the biggest threats to journalists internationally. So we only have 7 more minutes left on the clock. Rana and Trish, I just want to give you the chance if there's anything else you would like to say, perhaps to civil society organisations and any other groups in the room, any other representatives from intergovernmental organisations, for example, about how you would like to see them respond to the need to improve monitoring and to take a more preventive attitude. Can I come to you first, Rana?
I think I see a lot of people here who can make a difference, and from various civil society groups, I think, and they are making a difference. They are speaking. I mean, these panels were not a norm a couple of years ago, but they are becoming a norm now. We are having these discussions, so it's important. And we also have a panel tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. where we are discussing this in detail about how the state sponsors this. I mean, we have spoken about the methodology, but we also have to understand how the state comes in the picture. So it is very important that press freedom bodies address this problem and do not pick and choose battles, which we see a lot of press bodies sometimes do not consider some countries important enough for their problems to be addressed. I think it's very important because in my case, the Indian state is using almost every clout to see that this issue is not discussed because there's intersectionalities between the abuse and the fact that it's coming from Hindu nationalists and it's a majoritarian state. So I think it's very important that we take cognizance of this, and it is made into a bigger issue, and I'm glad on this panel we are talking about this as a big issue that journalism needs to confront.
And Trish, you mentioned difficulties, to say the least, in terms of getting accountability from law enforcement. So, one of the things that we need to do as we progress this project is to incorporate expert actors from within law enforcement in a way that can allow the responses to include, where it's feasible to do so, investigations. So can you perhaps respond to that? Like how you mentioned, it's difficult going into a police station, without evidence, for example, but how important is it to have law enforcement and judicial actors, so being part of these discussions?
Yeah, it's very important, Julie, and in my case, the original rape threat that was sent to me was traced to someone. He was a known criminal, and here into the investigation, I had to make a complaint to the police ombudsman for Northern Ireland because I felt police weren't doing enough to arrest this individual. That was in 2019. It's now 2023, and last month I was told that this individual will not face prosecution. And so I think there is serious questions to be asked of the PSNI and the PPS, the Public Prosecution Service, who made that decision, because if police can't convict a man who sent a rape threat to a journalist baby, I mean, with evidence, how are we going to do anything else? I mean, we need to put the pressure on the likes of the Police Service of Northern Ireland or what other police services there are in these cases, because there's not enough being done. The Ombudsman upheld my complaint, unbelievably, and actually told the PSNI to change their training in how they deal with social media threats. And they actually did set up a dedicated journalist safety unit in the PSNI. It didn't make a difference. So I think you said, what can we be done, Julie? We need to keep on. We need to keep the pressure on. Groups need to, I know Rebecca's sitting down there. She's been absolutely amazing for me and other journalists in keeping the pressure on authorities and saying this isn't good enough, this can't happen, and no one else should go through this. And I think, again, going back to the dashboard, the evidence building there is fantastic for, putting it to the police or any other authorities and saying, look at this, what are you going to do about this?
Yeah, and then, as you say, trying to bring together the advocacy and sort of regulatory reform responses and accountability of the states and the platforms is all part of the mix. It's a huge amount of work to do. It has to ultimately be a very collaborative effort, and we will be collaborating with organisations, including the Coalition Against Online Violence, for example, to try to take a networked approach to addressing this problem using the tools that we're developing. We have 3 minutes left, so I am going to cheekily suggest that that's enough time for one question. I know we've jammed an awful lot in here, but if anybody has a very burning question, we'll try to address it in the 90 seconds we'll have left. One right up the back with a hand up first. Can you tell us who you are and be very quick with your question? Maybe if you stand up and, oh, the microphone's coming, okay.
Hello, I'm Laetitia Béraud. I'm head of social media for Le Temps. It's a Swiss daily newspaper. So first, thank you for the presentation, which was very, very useful. And yeah, we have a lot of cases, even though Switzerland is very quiet. And yeah. I'm a French journalist, so I was working for Le Monde before, and this is nothing compared to France or, your countries. I have no idea. But I just had a question for Diana. So the Twitter abuse dashboards is amazing. We talked with my neighbors, and we were just wondering if maybe in the future you were going to make it a public tool that publishers could use. Of course, I think we are a lot asking that. So thank you.
Okay, Di's handing to me, I think. Is that what's happening there? So I should have mentioned this actually. This is part of our project. So Di with University of Sheffield and ICFJ, we're very much collaborating on this project. So this dashboard is integrated into the response. And as part of this project, we, towards the end of the year, will begin trialling this tool within news organisations. So we're in the process of developing collaborations with news organisations, partnerships that will allow us to do that, and to also begin to refine the design of this tool. Yes, ultimately the objective is to make it available. There are so many loopholes in terms of access to data that we have to try to navigate before it's freely available, in an open context. But the objective, from our perspective and from our funders' perspective, is to ultimately have a tool or a set of tools that are useful and freely available to as many people as possible, from newsrooms to civil society to intergovernmental actors. And on that note, it's 10:50, and as a former broadcaster who always talks to the top of the clock, I will say thank you very much, everybody, for being here, and thank you for your support.
Are you sure? I'm pretty good, so I can. And you were absolutely brilliant as well. Thank you. It kind of, I just kind of